Welcome to Let's Talk Micro. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Micro. As always, I hope you had a great week. And you can always find Let's Talk Micro on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Goodpods, Pandora, wherever you listen to podcasts, you can find Let's Talk Micro. As far as social media, I am on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube as Let's Talk Micro, on X as Let's Talk Micro 1, on LinkedIn as Luis Plaza, and have an email address which is letstalkmicro@outlook.com. So either via social media, via email, you can provide any feedback, any suggestions, any possible topics. They are always welcome and appreciated. So please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast, download episodes, and if the app allows you to do so, please go ahead and leave a review. Your support is always appreciated. Thank you so much. And if you haven't listened to the previous episode, please go ahead and do so. It was a great collaboration with the Breakpoints SIDP podcast. And they are a very established, very known podcast. And I had the opportunity to be a guest in it and talk about some great topics, such as the 2024 Breakpoint requirements from the College of American Pathologists. And that can definitely be a lot of information. Where do we start? What resources? So we go over, we talk about the toolkit. So definitely a great episode. And if you haven't checked it out, please go ahead and do so. And if you haven't checked out the Breakpoints podcast, I invite you to go ahead and do so. They have some great content, some great episodes. So please go ahead and check them out. And if you are looking to learn more about antibiotics, please check out www.learnantibiotics.com and the Learn Antibiotics book available on Amazon. And these resources include cheat sheets, practice tests, games, and more, and are being used by thousands of people worldwide, and may be helpful for you or your colleagues. And these resources are from Dr. Timothy Gauthier, who's a pharmacist and a very passionate one that wants to share information. I had the opportunity to meet him and talk to him, so I invite you to check out these resources. So one of the secrets of being a good microbiologist, a great one actually, is repetition, right? You see things over and over again. And also another thing that makes a microbiologist a great one is education. And with that comes knowing where the resources to do your job are and familiarize yourselves with them. And I did an episode which was episode 88, which was Clinical Microbiology Procedures Handbook. Well, the editors-in-chief, Amy Lieber and Carrie Ann Burnham, joined the podcast to talk about it. And another great resource is the Manual of Clinical Microbiology, which in 2023 released its 13th edition. So in this episode, I have Dr. Carroll, who's the Director of Clinical Microbiology Division at Johns Hopkins. And she's one of the editors-in-chief of this edition. And she comes to the podcast and talks about it and breaks it down, and, what type of content it has, what's new, how is this information obtained. So overall, it was a great episode with some great information. So thank you so much, Dr. Carroll, for taking the time. And one thing that Dr. Carroll said in the episode that I really liked was that it became apparent to her as an ID fellow that she could not do her job effectively as a consultant without the support of the microbiology lab. I really like that. So I hope you like this episode. As you know, the Manual of Clinical Microbiology is a very important resource, and if you work in the lab, you're familiar with them, and if you're not, after hearing this episode, you'll get familiar with it. So let's go ahead and listen to the episode. Last year, there was an episode of the podcast about one great and very important resource that we use in the clinical microbiology laboratory, which was the ASM Handbook from the American Society for Microbiology. So today we're here to talk about another very important resource that we have in the lab, which is the ASM Manual of Clinical Microbiology. So with me today, I have Dr. Carroll. Dr. Carroll, welcome to Let's Talk Micro.
Thank you. I really appreciate this invitation, Luis.
My pleasure. So I told the audience your name, and then maybe if we can do like a quick introduction, a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So, as I mentioned to you, since high school days, I've always found the microbial world very fascinating. And I have to thank mentors along the way who have steered me to embrace a career in medical microbiology. So I am a physician. After finishing a residency in internal medicine, I completed a fellowship in infectious diseases at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center. And fortuitously, I met Dr. Gary Dorn, who was the director of the microbiology laboratory there. It quickly became apparent to me as an ID fellow that I could not really do my job effectively as a consultant without the wonderful support of the clinical microbiology laboratory. I found myself visiting the lab every day to learn about the cultures of my patients and just really found it fascinating, what the techs did and how knowledgeable they were in the clinical lab. I realized that I wouldn't be able to treat them effectively without the work that they were doing. So a few years later, luckily, I found myself at the University of Utah, an institution that offered additional fellowship training in microbiology. And after a fellowship, I was offered a position as associate medical director of the micro lab at ARUP Incorporated, where I subsequently led the laboratory for about 14 years. And then in 2002, I accepted a position here at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine in the Department of Pathology as the director of the Clinical Microbiology Division. And I'm currently a professor of pathology. And my interests really are bacteriology. My association with the manual goes way back to the 8th edition, which was published in 2003. I was junior faculty then, and I was invited to be a chapter author, and I was thrilled. So I was invited 4 years before to contribute a chapter for the 2003 publication. And as I said, I was thrilled to be asked to participate because I considered it, an invaluable resource for me as a lab director. And shortly thereafter, I became a volume editor and then was asked to become editor in chief. So that's sort of my background and a little bit about, how I came to be associated with the manual.
Well, thank you for that, and once again, thank you for taking the time. I'm really that's a we'll talk more about this, but I'm very very happy to be talking about this, and I like that what you said about you went to the lab and you started learning more, and that's really good. I think that a lot of times, people outside the lab and physicians, they don't know much about what we do, and at the same time, on the reverse, we don't have a lot of idea what goes on, so like bridging those gaps and learning more about what goes on each side, it goes a long way. So thank you for that. That was great to hear.
Yes, and we continue that now. We have daily laboratory rounds, and we've invited our infectious disease colleagues to join us. And so it's wonderful for everybody to hear the patient presentation and then see how the micro lab contributes to patient management. So I know we're digressing a little bit from the manual, but the manual is important, for contributing to the knowledge as well. So
No, thank you. I like that. That sounds very very interesting. So, as far as if you're in the audience, you're listening, you're a medical laboratory scientist and you work in microbiology, you might be familiar with the Manual of Clinical Microbiology. But for the sake of everyone just tuning in, what is the Manual of Clinical Microbiology?
yeah, so the Manual of Clinical Microbiology is a textbook. It's been published by the American Society for Microbiology since 1970, and more recently in partnership with ASM's commercial book publishing partner, Wiley. In my opinion, it's one of the premier textbooks covering all aspects of clinical microbiology, written and edited by experts in the field. And these are experts that practice every day in clinical labs. Also, I want to highlight the international scope of the book. 1/3 of all authors who contributed content for the most recent 13th edition are from countries outside the United States. And so I believe the manual truly has a global impact. The book is divided into 9 sections, and we now have 4 volumes. And I know we'll get back to that in a moment with one of your questions. But in total, the book has 155 chapters, over 2,600 pages. The content in section 1 covers diagnostic strategies and general topics, whereas the other sections really focus on organisms. So they're organism-specific chapters related to the subdisciplines of bacteriology, virology, mycology, and parasitology. There are also separate sections within each volume that cover antimicrobial agents for treatment of all of those pathogens, as well as the susceptibility testing methods that we need to use for each category of organism. So the book is very comprehensive in its scope.
Yes, it is, and I'll talk more about this a little bit later about my experience with it, and definitely a lot of information, very organized, all in one place. As I said on the opening, a great resource. So the question might, comes to mind, there's definitely so much information out there, right? You go on a search engine, you search for something, you get all these hits, papers, this, and that. So overall, like, where is this information? How is it obtained?
Yeah, excellent question. So, chapter authors, as I mentioned, are experts in their field. They derive the content from each chapter from a combination of peer-reviewed literature, and some of this literature they may have contributed to through their research. Regulatory guidance, there are requirements for how we test. There are best practices. Some of the information may be found in professional society guidelines. We try to incorporate that. We also utilize guidelines from the Clinical Laboratory and Standards Institute and other bodies that are not professional societies that may provide some guidelines. In order to guide the authors, we do have an outline for the organism-specific chapters that each of the authors try to follow. So the general format of the organism-specific chapters include an update on the taxonomy of a particular genus or genera that may be discussed in that chapter, a description of the genus, what are the general characteristics that are common to the species in that group, epidemiology and transmission. We have to understand that so we know how to collect samples, and so we know how people get the disease. If we don't understand the epidemiology and transmission, then we cannot really appropriately develop diagnostic tests to detect them, for example. Clinical significance, what diseases, and we are focused in this manual primarily on human pathogens, although we do understand the One Health concept of, animals sometimes contributing to human diseases and maybe sometimes even vice versa, for example. Collection, transport, and storage of specimens, direct examination, and now we go beyond just stains and antigen detection to all of the wonderful molecular tools that we have out there for direct detection of pathogens in different clinical material. Isolation procedures, if they are still relevant. Some pathogens may not be easily cultivated, and so they have to be detected in a different way. And then for those organisms that are cultivated, what are the systems that we use for identification? And you'll notice the transition in the text over the additions over the years where we're relying less upon biochemicals. I mean, they are still important, but now we have better tools such as proteomics and sequencing that are replacing some of our labor-intensive and inaccurate methods of identification. We then round out the chapters with discussion of typing systems, which are important to tracking communicable diseases, serologic tests, that is the antibody response to the pathogen, which may be, the first line in diagnostics for certain particular pathogens, antimicrobial susceptibilities, and then finally we end each chapter with a summary on the evaluation, interpretation, and reporting of results. So there's a really nice logical flow, I think, to all of these chapters, which I think the reader finds very useful in terms of the consistency from chapter to chapter.
Well, thank you for that. And just by saying, like what's in the book and where the information is from, it pretty much kind of answers the next question. So by now, when I ask it, it's just going to be a little bit of, you can add anything to it. But definitely, all this relates to the work that we do in the clinical laboratory. Anything else that you want to add about that?
Yeah, so I just want to emphasize that the manual does strive to be a one text solution for the latest knowledge on all dimensions of clinical microbiology. And it does cover, critical information on pre-analytical, this specimen collection component, analytical, which of course is the testing that we talk about, and post-analytical aspects, how to report or communicate those results with the users of the laboratory. I mentioned the structured outline in pretty significant detail, probably more detail than you wanted. But I am very excited because I think the detailed structure allows the user to navigate the content more easily. And then personally, I know I'm biased, but this book has always been my go-to reference text for information to address questions and to just refresh my knowledge when we encounter less frequently isolated organisms in the clinical lab. And I also, make use of some of the references that the authors have cited when learning about them. I have to say that I've received great feedback from clinical microbiologists on the manual, stating, some have told me they find it invaluable to their work. And also they consider it their top resource, which of course makes me happy.
Yeah, no, I have to say, like I mentioned, it is a great resource, and for me, it's also a go-to resource, and I have so many memories, and it has helped, in the growth because, like I say, this is a lot of information, and what we do, it takes, it doesn't happen overnight to get proficient, to get comfortable. It takes a lot of repetition, a lot of using these resources, so you continue building on that knowledge bank, and it helps you. Yeah, sometimes a lot of cultures, you get the same organisms and it can be a little repetitive, right? You get a lot of E. coli, let's say Staph aureus, and we get pretty comfortable with those. But then we get those organisms or we get an unusual reaction or something we are not expecting. And I was an upcoming tech, not that long after I graduated the program, reading place, you're working on a weekend, you get an organism. Oh, what do I do? And I remember great memories of just pulling those books and saying, okay, I have this reaction. And then, of course, if you're unsure and, always consult someone more proficient, like your director, let's say your supervisor. But at the very least, you do that research and you prepare and you find the information. A lot of times, just by looking at this, it helps you with okay, yeah, it makes sense. This matches. I have this morphology, this biochemicals. I'm confident that this is what I have here. So I definitely recommend to the audience as you start working in a lab, just look up this resource and we'll talk more about availability, but just make sure you look at it. It is great and you're gonna benefit a great deal from it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Luis. Also, this might be a good time to just say that as people use the manual, we love feedback. ASM Press would like the feedback. The editors, section editors, volume editors, even chapter authors would like feedback on things that maybe were omitted, or things that perhaps require more than a cursory discussion. We make use of that feedback to update every edition. And, we'll talk about maybe in a few minutes some of the new content in MCM 13, a lot of which came out of feedback from the authors themselves, but also some of the editors, and then colleagues of authors and editors who found the book maybe lacking in a particular area. So feedback is always welcome, and we encourage people to drop us a line.
Okay, and just real quick on that, they is there like a specific place or they can go to the ASM website and provide that feedback?
Yeah, I don't think there's a place on the ASM website, but I think the contact information for the authors and editors is can be found in the front matter of the book. And people are also welcome to, email myself, through the Johns Hopkins, they can just search for my email address or my information through the Johns Hopkins portal um, website, Johns Hopkins Medicine website.
Yes, and that's kind of how I, as I looked at the book and I saw the editors, and that's how I found you. And yeah, so definitely reach out, and it was a positive experience from the moment that I reached out. I got a great response, and here we are doing this episode. So, you mentioned that so you are the editor in chief. So let's talk a little bit about what are your responsibilities, and as far as this position, is it permanent or does it change with every edition?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, actually, we now have two editors in chief. Myself and Michael Fowler are the two editors in chief for the current MCM 13, and we'll come back to that probably toward the end. But the editor in chief position is voluntary, but it is taken seriously by ASM. So ASM vets the recommendations on who to choose as editor in chief based upon usually, track record with the book, um, and also feedback from the section editors and volume editors on, did the editor in chief was the editor in chief responsive? Did they do a good job, etc. The editors in chief are responsible for overseeing all editorial aspects of the book and shaping its content. We work very closely with our wonderful section editors and volume editors. Some of the conversations at the beginning are to establish the number and types of chapters. Do we need to expand the content? How much is there like really old content that just should go away? And what is the new content that we need to include, and how do we do that? We like to discuss the authors that we've chosen, and we choose them based upon their track record in the literature. They're content experts. We also want to choose people that pay attention to deadlines. So that's very important to ensure timely publication of the book. The editor in chief, of course, is responsible for ensuring that production meets the deadline. And we have to deal with any issues, conflicts, or queries that come up during the whole process. And suffice it to say that the editors may end up having to write a chapter if an author doesn't come through. So I ended up having to do that for a prior edition of the book. But at any rate, it's just an honor to be an editor in chief. It's just been such a pleasure to work with such smart people that I've had the pleasure to work with over these past 4 years.
So this is the 13th edition, right? So definitely, as we know, in microbiology, there's a lot of changes, constant, things like names, with instrumentation. So it's a field that continues to change and evolve. So what's new in this edition?
Yeah, so I think, of course, this edition, and again, I'm biased, is one of the best ever because we added new content and really exciting and relevant content. As you mentioned, the field is constantly changing. We have to keep pace with all aspects of clinical microbiology. And even though all of the chapters are refreshed with new content, for this particular edition, I would like to highlight some things. So in section 1, we, again, based upon feedback from readers, we added a new chapter on diagnostic stewardship. This chapter is simply wonderful. It contains a wealth of practical information for daily improvements in appropriate test utilization and ways to collaborate with antimicrobial stewardship teams in your institution. The chapters on the microbiome, again in section 1, and molecular techniques were completely rewritten, and again are just excellent in their content. In section 2, which is the bacteriology section, taxonomic changes among the Enterobacterales necessitated reorganization of some of the existing chapters, and Salmonella now deservedly has its own chapter. The chapters on anaerobes have been highlighted with many new genera and species that have been discovered as a consequence of microbiome research. And these organisms are making their way into updated databases of our, MALDI-TOF mass spec instruments and other platforms. Section 3 comprehensively addresses antibacterial agents and susceptibility testing methods, incorporating the latest updates from CLSI and UCAST, UCAST stands for the European Committee on Antimicrobial Susceptibility Testing. And then for volume 3, which is virology, and volume 4, mycology and parasitology, those chapters, or those volumes, I should say, follow the same outline as for the bacteriology chapters. People will find that in section 4, which is virology, the transition from culture to molecular methods remains an important emphasis. During the updating of the 13th edition, we found ourselves in the midst of a global pandemic, the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic. And the most transformative changes occurred to the coronavirus chapter. And I would like to take this opportunity to give a big shout out to the authors of that chapter, Dr. Benjamin Pinsky from Stanford University School of Medicine, and Dr. Heba Mustafa from Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, who delivered timely, updated content through the online version of the manual, and I know we'll come back to the online version, while simultaneously battling the pandemic in their own institutions. So that content not only has the latest diagnostic approaches, but also emphasizes the importance of next generation sequencing in understanding the emerging SARS-CoV-2 variants. The importance of sequencing as a tool to characterize drug resistance is also highlighted, particularly in the chapter on HIV, and as well as in the chapter on viral susceptibility methods. And other important content in the virology section was an expansion of the chapter on parvoviruses and also the chapter on pox viruses, because, again, just prior to publication, there was an international outbreak, as you know, of Mpox beginning in May 2022. And so, again, we have the timely information in that chapter. And then finally, taxonomic updates to organism groups based on advances in molecular taxonomy. We know that's a controversial topic among clinical microbiologists. The rules of fungal nomenclature in particular have evolved with these new phylogenetic approaches. The manual has an updated chapter on taxonomy classification and nomenclature in an attempt to try to demystify some of the complexity associated with these changes. New species have been added to several of the mycology and parasitology chapters. And then finally, chapters 130 through to 135 provide exciting updates, highlighting novel antifungal treatments. We finally have uh, new antifungal treatments in particular for immunocompromised patients. And there's information in the manual on these new drugs, emergence of resistance, and guidelines for antifungal susceptibility testing. So lots of great new information in this edition.
Wow, definitely a lot of great content. Definitely as a microbiologist, it's so exciting with all this technology, and as we see more, like we're seeing all these names, and definitely, yeah, a lot of changes. We're learning so much, all these organisms, we started like at my facility, we brought Molotov a few years ago. We started seeing the increase in names. Now we're starting to work on NGS. So definitely it's just if you like doing this, you are in very exciting times. Um, and definitely, I had the pleasure of meeting, Dr. Pinsky and Dr. Mustafa as well. Actually, Dr. Pinsky was a guest in this podcast.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So we did a great episode on viruses. Yeah. So, one thing that I saw when this edition came out as last year, the handbook, it's actually used to be three binders, and then it came up to five, smaller books. And this, the Manual of Microbiology, used to be two books. It changed the cover with the editions. You might remember if you have some older editions, there was like some green ones, then kind of like
Right.
like a brownish ones. I have two that are the blue ones, which was the last one before this that came out. But now when it came out and I saw the pictures and everything, it is four. So four volumes. So what can you tell us about this and why the change?
Yeah, so, as you're aware, and we've already talked about, the microbial world continues to expand and challenge us. We continue to see emergence of novel pathogens causing global pandemics. Vector-borne diseases are on the rise. There's a crisis of antimicrobial resistance that keeps microbiologists on their toes. And, we have to keep pace with these resistance mechanisms and procedures to test them. So, the manual has to keep pace with disruptive technologies that spun out of the SARS-CoV-2 epidemic that spurred innovation. And so, in order to make room for all of that, it was felt that we needed to expand beyond our usual two-book concept. I mean, and the other reason to do that also was because we the books otherwise start getting really unwieldy if they're too big. And so we found that the existing content really worked well, or was really accommodating very well in 4 volumes. And also, one of the interesting things, based upon user feedback, is that on the book spines, I'm going to hold up the book if that's okay. On the book spine, we're able to tell you, I don't think you can see it very well at the bottom, but we're able to tell you what is in this particular volume. So for example, for volume 1, it's general topics, bacteriology, and general gram positives, so on and so forth. Also, for each volume, we've added an index at the back of each volume, so it's easy for you to find the information that you need, regardless of which volume you have, happen to pick up.
Oh, I like that you can see when you look at the spine. I know that's sometimes a little challenging that you're gonna look and then check the index and then let's say you grab one, but what you need is in the other one.
Other one, right?
Yeah, and I guess sometimes maybe we don't think much about that. And I was actually like you saw yours and I'm holding the previous edition. Yeah, and you just look
Right.
and it says volume one, and then you have the names, it's 12th edition, but you don't see what the content is. So
Yeah, so this is kind of nice, I think.
yeah, I definitely agree. So we're in a digital era where definitely a lot of these resources are are online, and we get things that we can see the like the CLSI online and things like that. How about this resource? Is it online?
Yes, it is. So, based upon reader feedback, we have heard from folks that by the time the book goes to press on an every 4 year cycle, some of the content may be outdated. So, ASM Press in 2019 began piloting, and I have to emphasize that it's piloting, an online solution called ClinMicro Now to enable an exploration of more frequent updates. And I alluded to the coronavirus chapter, which underwent several updates within that, 4 year period of time. So the updates are really designed to allow us to incorporate changes that really should appear in the book before the next print edition. So this was the brainchild of ASM Press's former director, Christine Charlip. It's called ClinMicro Now. ClinMicro Now currently has the entire MCM 13 content available in electronic format, as well as the most recent fifth edition of the Clinical Micro Procedures Handbook and the fourth edition of Cases in Medical Microbiology and Infectious Diseases books. I know that there will continue to be online content going forward. I'm not sure what's going to happen, with ClinMicro now. The online format may be a little different going forward, but there will always be now this resource available online.
Yeah, definitely it's very, very useful. And sometimes, if you have it and then you just like working at your computer and it's easy of access, I'd rather than having to stand up and get up. But yeah, this and then the book is just like always, they're available for purchase as well. So that's something that you don't have to. Yeah, in your lab you have a set and you can look at it. But if you wish to do some light reading, quote unquote, at home or learn a little bit more, you're definitely you can go and look it up and purchase them and then review on your own time. It's a great purchase, as I said, and some great content that's very important for your knowledge and growth as a microbiologist. Is there anything else that you want to add?
Well, first, I want to thank you, Luis, for allowing me to talk about this project. It was a labor of love. And as I said, it's been an honor and a privilege to work on MCM 13 as co-editor in chief with Dr. Fowler. Dr. Fowler is not going to continue for the next edition. Although he has clearly contributed over the decades. He was volume editor for 4 editions and co-editor in chief on 3 editions of the manual. So the manual really benefited from his expertise and his incisive edits. So I'm looking forward to working with the new co-editor in chief, Dr. Marie Landry, for the 4th edition. Like Dr. Fowler, Dr. Landry has been a volume editor of MCM for several of the past editions, and she will work with the section editors and volume editors of volumes 3 and 4. And then again, I just want to thank and just say that I've had the honor of working with many motivated, dedicated, creative authors and editors, as well as the amazing production editors and staff at ASM, Ellie Tupper, Ellen Fox, and now Megan Angelini. MCM, believe it or not, MCM 14 is in the planning stages right now, and I think it's going to build upon the enthusiasm and lessons learned from the production of MCM 13. So for those of you who are users of the manual, please give us feedback on what you like and what you would like to see in the next edition. And thank you again, Luis, for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
No, definitely. Thank you. It has been a pleasure, and one of those things that who would have thought that me years ago. Look, I started using these books. I will be talking to one of the editors in chief, and it's great. So no, definitely thank you for taking the time and for doing this work. We all benefit so much from it. And I invite the audience, as I said before, check out these resources. If you're in the lab, if you have some downtime, look them up, look through them. And if you want to, and you don't have the funds and you want to purchase them, go ahead. I definitely recommend it. So, Dr. Carroll, thank you so much again for taking the time to be in Let's Talk Micro.
You're welcome, Luis. Have a great day.
My pleasure.
Take care.
And that, my dear audience, it's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoy learning about the Manual of Clinical Microbiology. As always, I enjoy sharing this information with you. Thank you so much for the support. Thank you for downloading episodes. Thank you for sharing my content. I am so grateful. So please, continue bringing that passion to what you do. It's so important. You do such great work. And stay tuned. Great things coming your way. So, as always, stay motivated, stay safe, and of course, continue talking micro. Until the next time. Bye.